Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and a warm welcome to our speakers who have made this Automechanika webinar possible. It's hosted in association with Absa and fully supported by the RMI. By way of introduction, I'm Neil Piper, the Head of Digital Marketing and Content for Meze Frankfurt, South Africa. And to set the scene today, Automechanika is the world's largest network of international B2B events for the automotive aftermarket, which includes events in over 17 countries. This Automechanika webinar series has been rolled out throughout the world with great interest and international appeal. And as we build to hosting Automechanika as a live in-person event at the Johannesburg Expo Center taking place next week between the 7th to the 10th of June. This will be our final installment of the 6 webinars that we have hosted leading up to the event. If you have not yet registered for Automechanika, I urge you to do so. Head to the Automechanika website and register today. It really is going to be a super event, and it's an opportunity for you all to connect face-to-face with your industry peers, something that we haven't been able to do for a few years now. So what a wonderful platform Automechanika is offering. The webinar theme for today is Intra-Africa Automotive Manufacturing, Component and Distribution Ecosystems in Africa. Before we get started, if I can ask that if you've got any questions, please post them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many questions as part of the panel discussion at the end of the webinar, towards the end of the webinar. But now let's get straight into it, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel of speakers today. First up, we've got Tommy Letsualo. He's the Business Development Manager, Automotive Sector Relationship Banking, Wholesale, Retail and Franchise Business. Tommy is the Automotive Sector Specialist for Absa Bank, focused on wholesale, retail and franchise business in the automotive and fuel sectors. He is a solution-led automotive thought leader, providing related specific financial and non-financial solutions to his customers and to the broader sector. Welcome, Tommy. Next up, we've got Sijeng Matlako. She's the regional head, transactional and banking sales at Absa. She leads a team that is dedicated to unlocking value for clients through international and domestic trade, as well as transactional banking services. She has over 11 years of banking experience, whilst her career spans through audit, credit, and financial risk. Next up, we've got Dr. Norman Lamprecht. He's the Executive Manager, Trade, Exports and Research for NAMSA. He's been in this position since 2005. He has established the AIEC, which is operated from the NAMSA offices in Pretoria, as the acknowledged source of the automotive trade data information to the industry as contained in the annual Automotive Export Manual publications. And that's something that he's going to be talking about a little bit later. And he's been the author of 16 annual publications to date. So it is truly an honor to have him with us today and for him to share his knowledge here. So Norman, welcome. Thank you for being part of this. And then last, but by no means least, we've got Justin Schmidt, the Head of New Sector Development for Absa. Justin's an experienced leader in the financial services sector with strong analytical and business development skills. He's got over 14 years rich industry experience, and he really drives innovation and has started new focus areas within the organization. And he leads the new sector development in retail business bank, where manufacturing, transport and logistics, as well as renewable energy are focus sectors in his portfolio. Welcome, Justin, and thank you for being here today. It's good to have you on board. And then just to set the scene for us from an Absa perspective, I'd like to now hand over to Tommy. welcome, Tommy, and thanks for being here again today, and for all of the support over the past few months, all your guidance and your help in putting the series together. I think it's been really successful. And on that note, over to you.
Okay, now thanks, Anil. Thanks everyone who's joining us. We've decided to take time to come and listen to this one of interesting topics that is on our horizon. And again, thanks to Mr. Frankfurt, RMI, and all the stakeholders that we've been engaging with over the years. So in terms of context, I think this topic for us is very important. And the key thing from us is that us as a financial institution is to enable businesses in manufacturing to have a competitive edge and advantage in the sectors that they are operating in, especially in the automotive sector on that. So the AFCFT, it's especially important due to what we've just came out of the COVID and now the geopolitical conflicts that are currently happening, which are expected to further push more people into poverty and more so in our continent. And this will also create Africa to lose out in terms of the output, especially from manufacturing. So for us, as we are trying to enable businesses, we are really excited about this, because by increasing regional trade, lowering costs and streamlining border controls will help countries to increase their resilience in the face of economic shocks from macroeconomics, as we've seen in South Africa. Petrol price, it's also a big issue, and this will enhance much needed long-term growth for the continent. So as South Africa, we are positioned correctly to enhance the growth with our trading partners in the continent, especially the automotive sector. As we know, South Africa, we've got a very strong automotive sector. And by having this agreement indicates that there is a need to fast track our efforts in order to reduce trade costs, enable free flow of goods, enable capital and information across borders. And this will create a competitive business environment that can boost investment and promote productivity and innovation for local businesses. As we know, we really need jobs. We really need to make sure that the businesses stay afloat. So the efforts of all stakeholders must be directed to reduce the burden on business and traders across the borders in order to quickly and minimize interference due to different legislation and stuff. So the whole umbrella, I think it's something that's going to assist us. And our view is that this will reshape African economies, especially in the automotive sector, and create much needed jobs in the economy and increase our productivity on that. When we look at ours, I mean, we've got a large and growing middle class, and there's a potential for the automotive market, as vehicle ownership in Africa is still low compared to the global rate that we are producing in South Africa. I mean, we produce below 1% of the global vehicles on that, and most of them are consumed in our European and Chinese market on that. So South Africa is very important as an exporter globally, and this can enhance the value chains that we see in South Africa. So the much needed investment that needs to be unlocked by key institutions and financial institutions and all stakeholders that are there to make sure that we come to play and to increase connectivity and have to make sure that we create economic benefits in different countries on that. So in short, I'm saying policymakers and the business community should prioritize, develop, and implement smarter local strategies to seize this rising opportunity in manufacturing and industrialization across a variety of sectors and increase our global competitiveness in the continent. I mean, business to business spending is a major contributor to growth, and these countries are beginning to implement policies to capitalize on this opportunity. So I urge all stakeholders to say, let's enhance this, let us be the enablers to make sure that we are creating that much needed growth in different countries. As we know that by the time we start doing this and we start to show our efforts, one key thing that comes in, it comes in the form of infrastructure investment. So without wasting time, I mean, we've got my colleagues here who will unpack on this, and I really urge you guys to also post questions so that by the time we get to the panel discussion, we are able to elaborate further, and let's have a very engaging session going forward. So thanks, Neil, on that.
Tommy, thank you very much. And on that note, again, we just urge everybody, put those questions in the Q&A tab. I think throughout the series, we've been very fortunate that we've had lots of engagement from the audience, a lot of questions coming through. And when we get to the panel discussion, we are open to running through all of those questions, and to have such an esteemed panel with us. It's a great opportunity for your question to be answered. So please do that. And then just a reminder, guys, we will be recording this webinar, and we will share it with everybody that is attending today after the webinar. Now we move on to our next speaker, and that is Sejeng Motlhako, who will unpack the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We're very fortunate to have her on today. Very excited to hear what you've got to say, Sejeng, and over to you. Good luck.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks to everybody that has joined us in this virtual session this afternoon. I do hope that I'm audible. If I'm not, I suppose somebody will let me know. Looking forward to all the other speakers, and to Neil's point, and Tammy, I think for me, what would be a success is the collaboration and really touching base with everybody on the line, understanding that this is a virtual session. It can be difficult to touch base with everybody. Neil, as I was preparing for this session, and I was just thinking, how does one unpack such an important topic over literally 10 minutes, work that's been done as far back as 2018, 2017, that is now to be unpacked in a space of 10 minutes. I say this because as I was preparing, I was reading up on how we in Africa as a continent are exporting amongst each other only 16% of our goods and services. Yet in other continents, such as Europe, 68% amongst each other. I have stats here that in Asia, they are importing and exporting from each other, 59% and 55% in America, and so on. That says to me that it brings up the topic as just to how important and the things that we've done to get to this stage from an AFCA perspective. An agreement that proves to be or will be the largest free trade area agreement in the world. Once we have everything under control, once we've implemented everything that we need to. However, very important, I think what I wanted to highlight is there's many dates, there's many developments that have been going on around the AFCFTA, but two dates for me is, number one, given the stats that I've just mentioned, the date when this agreement was signed on the 30th of May 2019 is a significant milestone, together with the fact that effective as at 1st of January in 2021, we could actually start trading under the agreement. Some salient features, I always say that things go in three. I could mention 10 of them, but for me, what comes out as outstanding of the AFCFTA is, one, the number of countries involved. We've got 54 countries involved in this agreement to date. I remember reading a stat that as and when it was signed, I think there was only about 24 countries at the time. And for me, the fact that 54 countries are now involved in trying to actively get this agreement and implement it is fantastic. And it talks to the need that is required amongst the many different countries to be able to trade with each other. Goes without saying that the tariff reduction, the tariff elimination that is anticipated amongst the members will probably be the most significant achievement of this agreement, as far as costs are going to be reduced for the many component manufacturers, the many business owners that are trying to just trade amongst each other around Africa. There is the relaxation of regulation and also barrier to entry is something that is also what I consider to be quite significant for me as I look at what I consider the salient features of this agreement. If I look at what the World Bank organization estimates that 30 million people will be lifted out of extreme poverty because of the AfCFTA, and another 68 million from moderate poverty would be lifted outside of that poverty. That's a significant impact. And I mean, I think the estimate is something about 2035, we want to have achieved this. If I haven't by now explained, or you haven't by now caught on into just how significant this agreement is, I suppose these two stats alone should just be the ones that say to you, listen, I also want to get involved. I also want to see what it is that I want to do myself as institutions, as companies, just to make sure that we do achieve these kinds of stats by the end of 2035. I mean, there's an estimation that there'll be 450 billion real income gains by 2035, if and when we get the agreement implemented in a manner that is sustainable and in a manner that will make sure that we achieve these kinds of gains. That, I think, in a nutshell, for me, is what I would talk about as I talk about the unpacking of the or the high-level summary of the AfCFTA. But I do want to move on to its role and importance in the auto sector, or in a manner that what it can do to affect the auto sector. I mean, firstly, as I was researching again, that 1% of global vehicle output is coming out of the African continent, and the bulk of that being in South Africa and Morocco. Where's the other 99%? And for me, the AfCFTA is one of the things that we can do to start to shift this 1% to a 2%, to a 3%, to a 4%, and actually maybe get to a 5% global vehicle output. And I know we can with all the measures that have been put in place up to now. And I mean, if I think about what's still to come, I know that Ghana's auto policy was approved in March 2020. I do know that there's just some assembling of VW brands in Ghana. Toyota is assembling their Hilux and soon Suzuki. I know that Nissan Navara and soon Peugeot is also assembled a couple of plants in the African continent. And that, for me, as I talk about the AfCFTA, and I think about, if I've got a component manufacturer that's sitting in South Africa or that is sitting in Morocco, that actually wants to come in and be able to help Toyota as they assemble the Hilux in Ghana. In my mind, that is where the impact of this agreement is going to be. That is where we are going to see the impact of the real economic driver and the improvement of our economy. There is a bit of a lack of economic growth, and also, I mean, I've always spoken about the much unemployment, rising unemployment stats that are in our continent. And for me, things like, or agreements such as the FTA are the kinds of agreements, or the kinds of things we ought to be doing right as a continent to ensure that we are driving economic growth, we are driving reducing unemployment rate in our continent. I do think that what we can achieve from an automotive sector is regional integration. I think I gave the example about how component manufacturers in South Africa can Ghana and just get the components into Ghana, whilst obviously upskilling the Ghanaian community to ensure that they are also sufficient themselves, to make sure that those components are built and so forth in their various countries. The cost and the waste reduction that I've spoken about, I feel that is definitely going to be one of the biggest success factors of this from where I'm sitting. I think more than anything is also ensuring that, and I'll speak of this coming from a financial institution perspective, is the support that we ought to give to our component manufacturers or anybody that wants to be exporting or importing against each other, from a funding perspective, from a skills perspective, and just also to get everybody connected together to say, listen, we know this person in that country that can help you with so forth, and get the system and the ecosystem running. We were in a session the other day around the SME segment, and it was quite interesting that in the African continent, there's about 80% of our continent that is accountable to just general SMEs. And I know that this is where the growth of the continent and the economy at large is going to come from. And as a result, we all just ought to be coming together and ensuring through agreements such as the AFCFTA to ensure that we are at least moving one step ahead into ensuring that we meet our objectives as a continent. I do want to say in closing, Neil, that there's still a lot of work to be done from an AFCFTA perspective. However, that work, in my mind, if we put ourselves, if we come together and we take it one step at a time. If I think about when this agreement was signed and where we are today, it says to me that the more we take one step at a time, 1 minute at a time, and make sure that we are actually reaching our objectives by 2035, I can't see why we wouldn't have reached the kind of objectives of really decreasing poverty in our continent, and most importantly, ensuring that we are sustaining ourselves from an economic growth perspective. Thanks, Neil. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeng, and sorry that we did that to you. I know it's such a short period of time, as you said, but you did such a wonderful job in setting the scene for us today. So thank you for that. And like you say, 30 million out of poverty, that is amazing. So we're moving in the right direction. So thank you very much for your efforts in preparing for today. And I'm going to now hand over to our next speaker. And I'd like to welcome him again, Dr. Norman Lamprecht, who will share key research findings of the export manual that was recently published. And on that note, Norman, over to you. Good to see you.
Neil, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. In the time available, I'm just going to briefly highlight a few key findings from the 2022 Automotive Export Manual publication, which I'm responsible for, and also focus on Africa in particular. In 2021, although the domestic automotive industry sharply rebounded from the severely COVID-19 affected 2020, the growth experience has not been sufficient to return to pre-pandemic levels. COVID has set the South African and the global automotive industry back by about 3 years. However, despite the pandemic and all the supply chain disruptions, there were a number of records achieved on the side of the domestic automotive industry last year. The value of vehicle and automotive component exports increased to a record 207.5 billion rand in 2021, and the export value comprised 12.5% of total South African exports. The vehicle export value increased from 121.2 billion in 2020 to 138.3 billion in 2021, while automotive component exports reflected quite a significant increase to a record 69.2 billion rand last year, up from the 54.5 billion in the previous year. This was mainly due to record catalytic converter exports of 54.9 billion rand. Our industry's export destinations increased to 152 countries last year, up from the 147 destinations the previous year, with the export value doubling year on year in the case of 32 of these countries. The domestic automotive sector remains one of the most visible sectors receiving foreign direct investment. The 7 OEMs invested 8.8 billion rand in 2021, which was the second highest annual figure on record, while the component sector invested a record 5.7 billion rand last year. In 2021, the broader automotive industry's contribution to the GDP comprised 4.3%, of which 2.4% manufacturing and 1.9% retail. I'm sure we're all familiar that as the largest manufacturing sector in the country's economy, a substantial 17.3% of value addition within South Africa's manufacturing output was derived from vehicle and automotive component manufacturing. Projections last year were for a loss of vehicle production of around 7 million units globally due to the shortage of semiconductors. That prediction materialized, and global vehicle production in 2021 only increased by a modest 3.1% to reach 80.2 million units, which was still 13% below the pre-pandemic level of 92.2 million vehicles. South African vehicle production increased year on year by 11.8%, which exceeded the global production figure of 3.1%. So subsequently, our country's global vehicle production ranking improved to 21st last year, up from 22nd the previous year, while our industry's global market share increased to 0.62%, up from the 0.58% in 2020. Interestingly, in terms of global bakkie production, South Africa was ranked 14th with a market share of 1.25%. Global new vehicle sales increased by 5% to 82.7 million units in 2021, still 8.5 million units below the pre-pandemic level. Electric vehicle or new energy vehicle sales, as a term that we use in the industry, have been particularly impressive over the last 3 years. Last year, NEV sales more than doubled year on year to 6.6 million units. NEV sales in China tripled to 3.4 million units in 2021, which means that more NEVs were sold in China last year than in the whole world in 2020, when 3.24 million vehicle NEVs were sold. There's quite a lot of information on exports to regions in the publication, but the European Union as a bloc remained our automotive industry's largest export region and accounted for 60.1% of total automotive exports in 2021. Now, considering that 49.6% of automotive components and nearly 4 out of 5 vehicles were destined for the EU last year, developments in the region obviously have a direct and measurable impact on the South African automotive industry. A case in point is the transition to eco-friendly vehicles in the EU via government regulation by 2035, which to a large extent is determining developments in the domestic automotive industry as far as our NEV roadmap is concerned. Africa remains a priority focus for our automotive industry, as the continent comprised its second largest export region in 2021, accounting for 35 billion rand or 16.8% of total automotive exports. Our industry exported vehicles and components to 48 countries on the continent last year. Typically, when a vehicle is exported, it also creates opportunities for replacement part exports for the servicing of the vehicle. Something to mention is that out of the 680,514 new vehicles sold in Africa outside of South Africa, South Africa's market share last year comprised only 3.2% with our 21,825 vehicles exported to the continent. Now, as South Africa's natural market, I really believe that our vehicle exports into Africa should be multiple times higher than just 3% out of the total. In 2013, South Africa exported the same number of vehicles to Europe and Africa, which were around 80,000 units. But subsequently, our industries export to the top 2 export markets on the continent at the time. Nigeria imposed an additional import levy of 35% on new vehicle imports on top of the 35% import duty, and Algeria banned the imports of new vehicles, which basically cut off all our exports to those 2 countries. We know, however, that Africa has potential. In 2014, 1.1 million new vehicles were sold in Africa outside of South Africa. Now, should the continent follow the Made in Africa vision and produce more of what is consumed in Africa, it will really be a great outcome for our automotive industry. Africa's global vehicle production, as Seeing also already mentioned, the market share in 2021 comprised only 1.2% last year, with its 931,000 odd vehicles produced. Of interest is that Morocco had surpassed South Africa again last year with passenger car production. However, South Africa remains the overall dominant market on the continent, with a market share of 53.6% of Africa's vehicle production and 40.6% of vehicle sales in 2021. Regional market demand is one of the key pillars of the South African Automotive Master Plan. The AFCFTA, which was officially launched on the 1st of January 2021, I agree, holds in huge potential benefits for increased vehicles, components, and SKD exports into specifically the large markets of West Africa and the fast-growing economies of East Africa. However, one must recognize that a trade agreement is rather a process than an event, as it normally takes quite a long time to finalize. We've come a long way, but South Africa, as part of SACU, has not achieved the 90% modality yet for the number of tariff lines to become zero rated in order to start trading under the AFCFTA. So at this point in time, we're not able to capitalize on the agreement yet, while the rules of origin for automotive products have also not been finalized. One of the most important benefits anticipated under the AFCFTA will be the development of value chains spanning across multiple countries. In this regard, the Automotive within the framework of the AFCFTA has gained momentum since last year. The aim of the Autopack, the aim of the Autopack is to replicate an automotive ecosystem similar to the South African model, involving OEMs, suppliers, financiers, government, and other relevant industry role players in other African countries, such as Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, and potentially 1 or 2 others. If one look at an automotive SWOT analysis for Africa, there are probably more items to be added, but strengths and opportunities include Africa's huge untapped market, the potential of 5 million new vehicles sales in future, a growing middle class, and expanded opportunities by the AFCFTA in the Autopack. Weaknesses and threats include aspects such as low purchasing power, the absence of suitable vehicle financing options, fierce competition from low-cost, unregulated, imported used vehicles, making up currently 80% of total vehicle sales on the continent, and high logistics costs. All of these, which are main factors inhibiting new vehicle sales in the continent. When it comes to the establishment of a successful and a sustainable automotive industry, there are a number of key drivers required, and these include aspects such as government commitment and appropriate automotive policy framework, lowering the cost of doing business, exports, and cost-effective infrastructure, amongst others. These key drivers, once in place, will significantly enhance the upliftment of society and subsequently drive socio-economic development in many African countries in view of the significant contribution of an automotive industry to a country's economy. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, companies wanting to do business in Africa need to have a long-term view. As the AfCFTA unfolds and African markets expand, the early or existing entrants will generally have a competitive advantage in terms of market knowledge, established relationships, and distribution channels to outcompete rivals entering at a later stage. Most countries in the world and in Africa aspire to have an automotive industry. As a successful automotive industry is often seen as the emblem of economic success. Establishing regional automotive hubs in Africa will definitely be of mutual benefit for South Africa as well as for other African countries and regions. South Africa is ideally positioned to assist the other African countries with their automotive industry development and their policy formulation for them to become part of the automotive pack. If South Africa does not drive this, foreign countries will simply take that space, and it will really be a setback for the AfCFTA aspirations. Thank you.
Norman, thank you. That was very, very insightful. Thanks for all of your efforts putting that together. I've had a look at the export manual, Norman, and it is so content rich. Just for everybody on the call today, where can they get a copy of the export manual?
Neil, it is on the NAMSA as well as on the Automotive Industry Export Council website. I can just mention that last year I've also done quite an extensive research report on Africa and the AfCFTA, which is also on the Export Council website. It's just aiec.co.za. But hard copies are available from the NAMSA offices as well, if you want to make the trip to Pretoria.
Always good to go to Pretoria and see you guys there. But Norman, thank you so much. That was great. And ladies and gentlemen, on that note, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Justin Schmidt, who will be discussing the importance of growing the automotive sector through Africa trade investments and from a funder's perspective. Justin, on that note, over to you.
Thanks, Neil. I'm not used to being the presenter, normally asking the questions, so I hope everyone can see my screen. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for the insights from the colleagues. Wasn't sure how to prepare for this, because knowing anything automotive and data related, Norman would have that covered, and Sejeng, having worked with her for a long time, been excellent insights in terms of Africa Free Trade Agreement and the flow of funds and trade in general. So I've kind of taken an approach to say, okay, when we're looking at this sector, what are the things we're looking out for as a manufacturing department when we're talking to our credit colleagues, our sales teams, and what are some of the signs that we see that show that this is an important sector, but also the things that we see in the automotive sector that makes it a key focus sector for us. And then within that, kind of where's the thread in terms of the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and why is that such a positive thing? So I'll try kind of bring that in to all the points and just see where we think things are going and what we're considering as we see this trend develop. So we'll chat a bit about where confidence is, why demand for goods is so key to investment, what we've seen through COVID and potentially structural changes. And then some of the things to maybe consider as we see this demand increase and what could happen in terms of businesses and their need for working capital funding or managing their working capital cycles. And I think most importantly, just chatting a little bit about why policy certainty and things like the Africa Free Trade Agreement are so important for business. So let me just start then on kind of, and all of this will be from a South African perspective. Apologies to everyone that that's kind of where all our insights kind of sit. But the first thing I'd like to highlight is the I know Norman mentioned that it's, you know, we haven't clawed back the entire level of where we were before COVID. But for me, what's amazing to see is kind of the speed of the rebound. So while we still have growth to achieve and we still need to claw back more, I think when we were looking at the global financial crisis and how long it took us to rebound there, I think coming through a pandemic and the fact that we have seen good rebound in manufacturing is a positive. You know, living through a once in a lifetime event and then also having other shocks to the system. We actually continually get surprised by the data and when we see new data points. So I just think the first point we wanted to make is that there are increasing confidence levels. Locally, we did see kind of an all-time low at the kind of the height of COVID, and steadily there's been increased positivity within the industry. Why is this important? Well, this drives you know, future growth and investment into the industry, and that gets me to the next kind of slide. So yeah, as we see kind of increased activity, that boosts those numbers that you're seeing on the previous slide, and that drives stronger investments. So again, something like the Africa Free Trade Agreement, you know, why is it so important from a funder's perspective and as a bank that tries to support all manufacturers, but also especially automotive manufacturers? When you increase the demand for goods, you decrease the friction. I mean, this adds to the confidence, leads to more investment. Yeah, and just is that positive development that Norman was talking about earlier, you know, in terms of a win-win for everyone when we see the increased demand. So just quickly, in terms of on the left there, as Absa, we support the BER surveys that measure the confidence you saw on the previous slide, but also on a monthly basis, we look at the Purchasing Managers Index. So what are manufacturers saying about the immediate output that they're looking at? And what we've seen in this number this year, you know, anything above 50 is expansionary. And for the whole of this year, even though we had a blip last month, we've seen above 50 kind of numbers in there. And this has kind of been nice and surprising. It's been above what we've seen previously. We're manufacturing generally, you know, we used to it sitting below that 50 number. But really this year has kind of continually seen month-on-month increases in output. And there's been a strong signal for kind of clawing back the rest of that recovery. What we're also starting to see, along with that output increase, is that manufacturers are expecting business conditions to improve over the next 12 months. And what's really driving a lot of that is, you know, 12 months forward, increased demand for exports, which is really key to today's discussion, you know, earning that foreign currency and moving your goods into the rest of the world. And I think Sajang said it, that, you know, we trade 16% of our trade between Africa. I mean, yeah, so the more we can see Africa Free Trade Agreement kind of open those markets, the more graphs like this kind of give that heightened expectation on conditions over the next 12 months. And I mean, why is that important for us as well? And when we look at the sector, well, what's really interesting and what we're seeing these numbers produce is the graph on the right, where we've seen kind of, you know, we hit a almost all-time low in terms of fixed investment and the expectations for investment over the next 12 months. But as we've seen, you know, greater output, greater expectations, we've seen the net majority of manufacturers say, well, actually, we are investing currently. Over the next 12 months, we're looking at replacing machinery, but also expanding our production lines. And it's kind of moved across a point that we haven't seen for a long time, where more manufacturers are talking about investing than not investing. And I think coming back to kind of today's topic is that really, yeah, the more demand we create for our own goods, the more people will invest in infrastructure and create those jobs, create more outputs, and then kind of get that foreign income coming into the country. Yeah, so I mean, this next slide, I want to talk more broadly about policy certainty, but maybe to drill it down to something we all know broadly as an economy we live with, that we need certainty in a stable environment across all industries. You need that to kind of grow and remain competitive. So again, with this sort of policy and knowing how we can move goods and the markets we're moving into, just that policy certainty is key. And maybe to drill it down into kind of the energy sector where, you know, in this sector, the automotive sector, I was surprised when getting to grips with this industry that, you know, often load shedding is not a problem for manufacturers in this space if you're in the right area, because then it's part of the agreements for that FDI, and a lot of areas don't feel the impact of load shedding, which the graph on the left kind of predicts when we will have load shedding, and you can see, I'm not going to go into the details, but it talks about the shortfalls of energy and the likelihood of load shedding. But really I think most manufacturers wish they had that supply of energy and could plan on their production. So really having the right policies that enable kind of investment and make sure that you aren't impacted by certain events is key. I think also when you're not planning and you don't have these sorts of roadmaps, you know, this slide I put up there, what we've seen, you know, by not opening up the market in the energy side, not only have we had load shedding, but we've had kind of often double-digit above inflation energy price increases, you know, because we've had this monopoly. We don't have kind of this free market to bring in lower costs. And that comes through in kind of the production costs for manufacturers. So again, just trying to kind of make the point that we like seeing these regulations that open up markets, that enable free trade, and you know, just enable better planning for the future. And we're not planning for today, but rather you know, for the next 10 years and seeing where the economies will be at that stage. Yeah, so something else that we've been tracking, and something that I think we need to keep an eye on through Africa Free Trade Agreement. What we've got on the left is where we look at the raw material versus planned production, also finished goods versus relative demand. And these numbers are all sitting kind of at low levels, below zero. So what it shows you is, in general, manufacturers do not have the raw materials to, you know, they're not stocking up enough to meet their future demands. And we all know about what COVID showed us with the supply chain shocks, the prices of importing, which you see on the right. Well, the reliability of importing used to be, you know, sitting above 65, up to 85. I mean, in the last couple of years, it's sitting below 45%. And really, that makes planning so difficult. It also kind of hinders growth, just like a lack of energy would. And I think there's a lot of lessons to learn for the future. So questions we're asking is, you know, is with just in time and what we've seen through this supply chain and COVID disruption, is will manufacturers start stocking up more? And while just in time is important, is having that extra stock a competitive advantage, and something that going forward people will want to manage even more as competitive manufacturers? And we've seen it through the COVID crisis that if you have stock, it's a competitive advantage. So many manufacturers that, you know, didn't hold much stock are now stocking up, because with that extra stock they can manage their costs and stay competitive, but also meet demand. And I think as markets open up and there's more trade, and if we get, you know, from the 1% of market share to 2 to 3, you know, how will that impact the working capital cycles of manufacturers, and will that be something that needs to be managed? So I think I'm running out of time, but let me just quickly kind of touch here. For us as a funder, we see working capital as the key pillar for manufacturers, and we understand that it's seasonal in nature. So where you have your peaks in December is what we're showing in this graph. Generally, majority of sales happen in Q4, slightly less in Q3, and then the smaller kind of peaks are Q1 and Q2. So really, if we are trading more with Africa, growing business, you know, what's happening to that stock, but also knowing these peak season then are even more pronounced because the volumes are so much higher and the values are so much higher. So it is something that we do see kind of the growth as an important model, but what are these structural changes with inventory going to be, and then how are we supporting manufacturers to manage these cycles. And let me just end on the last slide then. So for us, what's key kind of when we're looking at the industry as funders, we've kind of broken it down into 3 pillars that are really important for us to understand and support manufacturers on. So the first pillar is kind of knowing that seasonal nature, the importance of working capital, also the importance of the flow of funds, so the international banking, whether you're importing components into South Africa or exporting, it just really, how do you manage that forex and your transactional needs around it. And then also when there's extra cash in businesses, you know, what are you doing with that liquidity to save for that deposit for the expansion, or just to kind of put back into the working capital cycle. So for us, I mean, as I've spoken about on the previous slides, these are things that as a funder we look at, and why, you know, Africa Free Trade Agreements, I think pillar 1 is key for us. You know, we've got to really work hand in hand with the industry to support the growth and make sure there's not kind of cash mismatches. Pillar 2, I won't really go into, but pillar 3 for us, value chain unlock, it's really about kind of the support that the industry receives. We know in South Africa, DTI is very supportive of this industry. You know, it's a key sector for the bounce back and the recovery of the economy. So really, how do we all work together between business, the funders and government to enable that growth? I think there as well, having master plans, while we don't love subsidies per se, I think what we do love is the clarity that a master plan brings, and the rules of engagement, and that you know there is support for that sector. So really this side of it is where we kind of work with our partners and make sure that we're on top of things and really supporting the kind of South African goals of growing this industry. And then I think finally the most important thing about manufacturing is the amount of quality skill jobs that it creates. And Sajeng spoke about it in her presentation, but you know, the job deficit and poverty, if we can grow these sorts of jobs, at least we know we are creating good jobs for more of the people across the continent. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Justin. Well done. Sometimes it's good to be the presenter, right? But ladies and gentlemen, now I think we get to the part where it's really important for us to have that engagement together as a team. So if you haven't put in your question in the Q&A chat, please do so now. Justin will be looking at those, and you'll be hosting the panel discussion now with all our panelists. So Justin, I think let's get straight into it. We've got about 10 odd minutes left before we end. So over to you. Thank you, Justin.
Unmute. Yeah, thank you. Let me just look there. Yeah, so please carry on posting your questions if you do have any questions. I think let me go straight to Norman. Yeah, so where are our top export destinations from an automotive perspective in Africa? And what's the reasons that those are kind of our top destinations?
Justin, thank you. Automotive exports to 9 countries in Africa exceeded the 1 billion rand level in 2021. Of those, 8 were in SADC. Kenya was the only one outside of SADC. The main reason basically for why SADC countries feature so prominently in our top export destinations is because SADC is a free trade area. Then typically countries like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, the top countries are in close proximity, also with easy access in terms of road and rail. Currently, outside of SADC, the typically logistics costs, as well as the high import duties and also non-tariff barriers are reasons which makes our products very expensive or uncompetitive. From my side, I'm very keen for this African Continental Free Trade Area or to be implemented, basically then to expand SADC to the rest of Africa? Thanks.
And that made me think of something for Sejeng, but I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. Yeah, so in terms of those frictions that you see outside of SADC, I think from a kind of trade perspective and flow of funds, is there anything, and also linking it to what Norman said earlier when he said it's a process, right? It's not an event, and there's a lot that we need to fix still. Just in terms of kind of trade and the flow of funds across the continent, I mean, is there anything to think of? Are there any kind of areas where there's good examples where, yeah, it is easier to trade with each other, both from kind of the foreign exchange kind of moving hands, but also just where you see good success stories between a couple countries?
So I think, Justin, to answer the question, I think a lot of the success stories has been normally in the sub-Saharan region. To Norman's point, I think there still needs to be a lot of work with regards to the rest of the continent. However, that said, I think as an organization, we are well placed in any event in many countries across the continent to facilitate any form of trade. I mean, we've seen lots of successes in Ghana from a trade perspective. We've seen lots of successes in Kenya from a trade perspective, together with international banking, you know, and payments and in payments in, payments out, as well as just managing your all day foreign exchange currencies and to hedge that risk and so forth. From how many countries are participating outside of South Africa to the rest of the continent, or do we see success stories? I think that's still yet to come. However, as I've mentioned, the fact that we as a bank are well positioned in many countries, I think we hold a strong position to be able to take any advantage of any opportunities that come up as and when we ramp up with the AfCFTA. I do agree, Norman, there's still a lot of work to be done, but to the point I was saying earlier, a lot has been done already, and I'm very confident that whilst we are scaling, there's definitely going to be success stories. Yes, I was caught off guard. Thanks.
Tommy, time to catch you off guard. I know we chat a lot about electric vehicles, and hopefully this doesn't, you don't stumble on this one. But there's a question here from Emmanuel. What is the plan for electric vehicle infrastructure and manufacturing process?
Okay, now thanks for the question, Emmanuel. So, I mean, for us as South Africa, we still have that long-term view in terms of electric vehicles. What we are seeing in the country currently is that we've got electric vehicles that are coming in. However, the pricing of that, it's still high, and there are some background engagement around the tax rebates to make sure that we do have the electric vehicles in the country. From infrastructure point of view, I assume you're talking about charging points. The infrastructure is there, is still being developed. There are different companies that are working on that, not to mention names, but then we are starting to see the rollout in major routes from Joburg to Cape Town, Joburg to Durban on that. So the infrastructure, it's really there. And then also, apart from the charging points, we are also seeing in the fuel industry where some of the oil companies now, they'll be taking their filling stations, turning them into the charging points. Different OEMs, some of them, they are still charging, you are able to go and charge there for free. So now the issue is going to be the rebates. How do we store electricity and the manufacturing process of that? So the OEMs in the country, we expect to see more vehicles coming in, but then it's more on the mass market, if I put it easily like that, to say, how do we get that pricing point that will work, and for us to be able to compare, if you move into the range that electric vehicle will have versus you having the 25 rand petrol, if we put it that way. So major roads, urban areas, I think that's where we'll firstly just go and run with that. We see IPPs are coming into the grid now, so that there is lots of advantage, and for us as South Africa or Africa in general, we've got lots of sun rays on that. So we just need to make sure that we've got just the pricing and the pricing of the vehicles right on that. Norman, I see you want to join in.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy. Justin, this is one of my passion areas. I'm actually very much involved on the new energy vehicle side from an industry's perspective. Correctly, the NEV roadmap from our side is basically 3 areas. One is there was a jointly funded NAMSA DTIC study, NEV research study, to come up with policy options to stimulate demand for NEVs in South Africa, and also to manufacture NEVs and NEV components. So we're currently busy, along with the DTIC, not just to focus on cost, but also on the benefits of transitioning to NEVs. The second pillar is actually on the infrastructure, rollout of public charging infrastructure. And the third point is on the white paper, which would provide the long-term strategy for the country. And I'm also busy with from NAMSA side contributing to that. But just interesting on the infrastructure side, South Africa is currently ahead of global average. We've got 5 public charging infrastructure or 5 vehicles per charging infrastructure. The global average is 8 to 1, but one must also recognize we only have a handful of battery electric vehicles so far in the country. The aim is obviously to roll out public infrastructure and also to focus on renewable energy as far as that is concerned. The main challenges currently on the NEV side is limited choice and the price differential. Limited choice, we've seen media reports about 20 battery electric vehicle launches this year and next year from different brands. And on the price differential, that's part of the policy options that we're focusing on. Thank you.
I think the energy space is fascinating, the changes that are coming, the deregulation, private sector participation. And I think, retail as well as kind of some of those commercial, seeing the changes that are happening in commercial fleets, the trucks, etc. But I think, I can spend way too much time on this topic. So let me get back to kind of the trade side of it. And Sajeng, maybe if I can ask you something about kind of your day-to-day and the stuff your expertise. From a automotive perspective, I mean, obviously working capital is key, and funding of these businesses, and where do you find the funding sources? What about kind of, what in your experience in the automotive sector here in South Africa enables you as a funder to support these businesses? And what are some of the competitive things that they have versus other industries for you to take a favorable view?
Thanks, Justin. I think things that we ought to be considering, in my mind, there's actually not, I wouldn't say there's a vast difference in terms of the auto sector in general versus other sectors. I think what we would look at as a business when we think about as a financier, when we think about how to fund an automotive, someone that's supplying, for instance, components to an OEM, is the support that is required from the OEM themselves. I'm saying this as I read a question from Matt is it Matt Jendrick on the chat, as to why are we not being innovative in terms of how we are funding businesses. And for me, it's actually a collaborative view. Justin, you are aware of some of the work that we're doing together with other DFIs and so forth, just to make sure that we supply, we provide finance and look at it different and innovative and different ways of funding. Automotive, I think we are fortunate in that as a country, we do have sufficient resources that are available to the automotive sector. We are lucky or fortunate as a country that South Africa is actually just but one of the largest in the 1%, Norman, by the way, of the rest of the country, that South Africa actually falls into that category where we have a vast amount of opportunity in terms of the OEMs that have invested in our country. And as a result, I do think we have a collaborative responsibilities together with other stakeholders to ensure that we are properly unpacking this industry and properly ensuring that we are providing the relevant working capital. I mean, we're talking working capital. I think there's many other aspects of the automotive sector that can be looked at. But I mean, from a working capital perspective, I mean, we've done a lot of work as well. But I suppose because of time, and I see Tammy raising his hand, we may just need to just stop it there for now. Thank you.
Nah, I just wanted to add to that. I mean, there's a lot of work that is being done, and as a finance, I think the key thing that we usually do, we go out there and look for partners like NAMSA and key people that are there. For example, there are different ways where you can enter the automotive. We do understand that the barriers to entries are high. I mean, you look at equipment; those things they are very expensive on that. So there are products that are there to make sure that you do get the equipment, the securities, negotiate better rates even with the OEMs on that. So it depends on the tiers that you're coming in. And just to sneak this in, if you look at what we are doing as a finance, I mean, next week, as part of the SMEs, we do understand that people want to come in. There are some enterprise development competition that will be running as Absa next week on there. So you can get the details from Automechanika side. But then for us, it's looking at the whole value chain, looking at the chain from your top tier OEMs. How do we support the OEMs to make sure that they open up the market for other suppliers that are coming in? And the biggest drive in South Africa is always manufacturing. So if we look at that, that's how we look at innovative ideas on how we can not only finance, how do we bring other support, to bring in grants, to bring in securities to assist people to get into this industry. So we are always looking at sort of a tripartite engagement once we do that. Thanks. But I'm willing to take questions later on and engage with some of the colleagues on how we can look at deals going forward.
Thank you, Tammy. I know we have to close off, and Neil, sorry, every session I'm on goes over. But yeah, and I think Matt, if we can kind of engage offline, let's chat about that, because we always want to innovate. But not to kind of end on, I think we spoke a lot about funding there. Maybe if I give the last comments, anything, Norman, that you want to say as a closing remark, and then I'll hand back over to Neil.
I think, there's for the specific reason Africa is a priority focus for our industry. I think there's huge opportunities in terms of the AFCFTA as it unfolds. There's a couple of technicalities. It's actually only 28 tariff lines required to get to the 90%. Unfortunately, there are sensitive sectors such as the automotive sector, the core of any trade agreement is basically the rules of origin, and we to make sure that there's a level playing field, and that is important for us from the industry side. Although we want market access, we just need to do it in a responsible way in terms of our position so far as far as the AFCFTA is concerned. But the Automotive Pact provides for more flexibility within that framework, and that has advanced, and I believe that something will happen there much quicker. Thank you.
Over to you, Neil.
Thank you very much, everybody. And Justin, Tommy, Norman, Sijeng, thank you very much for all of your efforts putting that together, and for the conversation. I know we could spend a lot more time here engaging and talking, but we do have limited time. And just again to all of the delegates, you'll get a full recording in due course of the webinar. And I'd just like to take the opportunity just to talk about Absa's got a competition that they're going to be running alongside Automechanika as part of the Automechanika event called the Small Enterprise Development Competition by Absa. There is a breakdown of prizes. It's 350,000 Rand in total. And that information is available on our website. And then Tommy, I can also hand over to you just to give a little bit more detail around that. I think it's really important that we, it is around small development, small enterprise development, and it's critical for the economy and the sector. And I love the fact that you are actually doing this next week alongside Automechanika. So on that note, I'm just going to hand over to you, Tommy.
Okay, now thanks on that. Just a quick one. So in terms of access to market, I think for us, we saw it that there's something that we can first of all give back to the guys that are within the automotive. And the biggest question to the banks has always been give us access, give us funding on that. So the whole thinking around the competition is that you pitch your business plan was there that you want to do in front of judges. So it's not only about the money. So there's 350,000 that will give away, but then the support that the person, whoever wins and those who don't win, I mean, there are these non-financial benefits that you'll get. You've got a team in enterprise development that will help these small businesses, I mean, give them access to market, assist them in marketing, and actually get them to be formal businesses and for hold these guys to go to your Norman and say, Namsa, these are the guys that are doing good in the industry. How do we assist them? How do we get them to that? So it's more than the competition, but then it's how do we set them up and post the competition. I mean, they'll have a team that will be assisting them, will be monitoring them to get them to the next level on that. So please do visit the Automechanika website, submit what needs to be done. We'll be there on site as from next week on that. And for us, this really shows that we are very serious about the automotive sector on that.
Thank you, Tommy. And if there are any questions that any of the participants have, they're more than welcome to reach out to us. Let's talk about it. The website to enter is Absa SME, Absa SME at automechanica.sa.co.za. But again, we can share that with everybody after the webinar. But please get in touch with myself or Tommy, and we can unpack it further with you. Then on that note, again, thank you for joining us over this period of webinars that we've run in the build-up to Automechanika. I can't believe we've run 6 already, Tommy. And then just a reminder, Automechanika next week, Johannesburg Expo Center, 7 to 10 June. If you haven't registered, please go register online on the Automechanika website, or you can register at the event itself. And to all of our speakers, not just today, but for all of the series that we've run, a big thank you from the Automechanika team, the Absa team, RMI, and I look forward to seeing you all next week at Automechanika in person. Thank you, everybody.